So, up next, we've got a panel session. So, if you're in this session, you're going to see Nathanael and Jonathan talk about where EUC should live. So, over to you guys. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yep, you guys might recognize me from earlier in the day. I presented about Citrix there, but this one isn't necessarily about Citrix. We're not allowed to talk about that. We're here thinking a bit about where does EUC live, whether it's in the cloud or on-prem. I'm Nathanael. I'll be presenting with Jonathan as well, who's got some great thoughts about it. He'll be coming up later. So the idea for this presentation came from two major sources. The first, you'll see on the left-hand side here, was the previous EUC forum meeting back in November, where we had at the end, as we will today as well, a bit of a roundtable discussion with everyone who had presented. And one of the topics that we ended up having a bit of back and forth on during that roundtable was exactly this question of hosting, self-hosting our resources on-prem, maybe in a traditional data center, versus hosting things in the cloud, almost renting our services there. And the trend that we've seen over the last few years, whether it's actually overall a better way to run things. We talked a bit there about legacy technologies, reliability, security, all of these kind of things. So that was the first idea for this, prompt for this presentation. The second was the results of a poll which was run independently, commissioned by Cloud Software Group, but which was exactly on this topic, on-prem versus cloud, or perhaps hybrid. It was a poll of about 350, well, exactly 350 UK-based IT and business leaders of companies with revenue over $500 million. So it's large enterprises, a poll of about 350 of leaders there, and we'll be seeing some of the results from that and how it plays into our conversation here. But we'll start with a bit of a history lesson. And I'm probably not the best person in this room to give a history lesson, but we'll run through how we got into the cloud. Tried to take a selection of milestones here. And we're going to start with just the major vendors here. In 2006, I believe it was, that Amazon launched AWS with EC2. Now, at the time, EUC wasn't a focus. That was about hosting, web apps, services, things like that. But pretty clear early on, it was clear that this was going to be a winner for them. And of course, Microsoft and Google were not far behind 2 years later, offering their Azure and GCP platforms. But EUC really began to pay attention to the cloud, or perhaps be offered in the cloud in more than a hosting capacity, with Amazon, again, with AppStream and Workspaces in 2014. Followed by Citrix with first the Cloud Management Plane, DAS, as it's called, in 2015, and the Cloud Access tier, taking the on-prem storefront product and hosting it in the cloud with Workspace. Of course, 2019, Microsoft released AVD. 2020, VMware launched Horizon Cloud. And that has continued with Windows 365, Amazon Workspace's core, and more development. And of course, there are so many more offerings and providers that are not listed here. But in the last 10 years, we've seen a bit of a revolution in the way that we do computing in general, services, hosted services, and also specifically in EUC. And we've been sold on the benefits of cloud. It can reduce your management cost. You no longer have to deal with the security, with the managing, with plugging in wires and replacing servers. We'll do that for you. Look, we have firewalling. We can handle the security side of things for you, even the physical security of the servers. You don't have to deal with that. Faster updates. It's much easier if it's in the cloud to be iterating, not just on the hardware, but on the software if you constantly have that access. There are the advantages of dynamic scaling, the burst capacity. If you're in a big shared environment, it's much quicker to do that and facilitate then the growth. I mean, I don't think I need to rehearse these to you, that the cloud is everywhere now. And clearly, something is working. These were just the graphs that Google was able to find for me about their biggest competitors. AWS, going from $1 billion to $9 billion in revenue in just 5 years. I couldn't find a graph just giving Azure revenue, but this is the Microsoft overall revenue, up to $44 billion from, what was that, $9 billion back in 2016. Something's working with the cloud businesses. And these graphs only go up to 2019. We know that since 2020 and COVID and everything that's happened since then, these are going even further to the cloud. So I wanted to just get a feel for this room here. I wanted to ask you guys, especially if you're end users in this case, what proportion of your data and applications are currently hosted in the cloud versus on some sort of on-prem infrastructure? So I'll go through these 4 options. Maybe just raise your hand for the right one. So maybe who here has nothing hosted in the cloud? You're all self-managed on-prem. No data, no applications hosted in the cloud. Okay, nobody, and I'm hoping that's because you're not all just going to keep your hands down throughout. That actually means that no one here has that. Who has at least some infrastructure in the cloud? Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay, that's quite a few there. Let's go there. Who would say they have most of their infrastructure in cloud code? Okay, yeah, still quite a few. Who has everything in the cloud? Yeah, okay, a decent number. But what's pretty clear there is that none of us are hosting exclusively on-prem anymore. The cloud, we've bought into it. We're investing into it. Those results are actually surprisingly similar to what we saw when polling those 350 UK business leaders. 1% said that they had nothing in the cloud. Beyond that, we're talking about accounting for the 1% who were not sure. 98% at least were using the cloud in some way, with 20% had over 3/4 of their applications and data hosted in the cloud. I mean, of all of the hype technologies that have come around in the last 10, 20 years, cloud is probably one of the most significant, and one that isn't so talked about, but has had a huge impact across technology and including EUC. But as our conversation at the previous EUC forum perhaps illustrated, I wonder if there's a bit of a shift in opinion in adoption of cloud for our end-user computing and for our technology in general. So another question for you. Have any of you been involved in what we're calling a cloud repatriation project in the last 3 years? That is, taking something that was hosted on cloud and bringing it on-prem. Hands up, who's been part of that? Okay, yeah, we see there's a few, maybe 10%, 5% of the room. Now, what's striking, this is where perhaps this audience differs significantly from our business leaders. Because when we polled that question to our 350 business leaders, 93% said yes, they had been involved in some sort of cloud repatriation project. Now, this probably illustrates something of these are high executive managers with fingers in lots of pies. But it illustrates that it is something fairly widespread, that they have been involved in those projects across the board. When we broke that down a bit more and put the question, what percentage of workloads moved to the cloud have you already moved back or are being considered, so this is future looking as well, back to on-prem, it was pretty clear. Of the things in the cloud, only 6% said none of it we would ever consider moving back on-prem. The other, 92%, all have at least something that they're considering moving back on-prem. And this is quite striking considering the way that we know that the cloud has transformed our industry and is pumping out the numbers for those hyperscaler providers. I tried to gather just a few case studies from non-EUC examples. Did anyone see these blog series from David Hanson, which went around LinkedIn over the last year or so? He's the creator of Ruby on Rails. But this was a big series about his business's 37 Signals cloud exit, where he really went into detail on the numbers, how much they were paying for their cloud provider subscription, how much they paid for their upfront for their servers to bring it on-prem, and illustrated there why that was the right move for their business. But it's something that has happened across other major providers. Since Elon took over at Twitter, there was a significant repatriation there, moving away from hosting in the cloud. Adobe did it, and even Dropbox. This article is actually from 2016. This isn't just a recent phenomenon, but they wrote extensively about why, when they're scaling to that level of data, hosting on-prem was the way to go for them. So this led to us asking, what has changed with that? Why are those advantages of cloud no longer resonating with people in the way that they did at one time? Well, of course, we put that question to our UK business leaders. And we see a few themes popping out. Of course, they were able to select multiple options here, and 33%, a third of them said it was security. So even though we can ask our cloud provider to deal with the physical security, even to deal with some degree of isolation and firewalling, it's never going to be equivalent to me having the data center manage that, in a way that I can see, or even hosting it on-prem in a colo setup. The other one that came up was exceeded budget. And actually, I shortened this. The other thing was unpredictable budget. That it's all very well and good that you tell me I can reduce my management costs, but then I'm paying higher fees in my hosting costs in my there, and it's unpredictable as well. It's very difficult to get into understand my breakdown of them. And there are still quite a few other things which were considered major factors. 25% said it just did not meet internal expectations. Maybe that's about the hype being too much and us not living up to it. Timelines, as much as we say it reduces the management overhead, there still is a lot of learning, a lot of acquiring knowledge to be able to meet those timelines, and training up is a big factor of this. And across the board, not impressing the C-suite, not impressing our users, issues with the partners, or maybe it just didn't get finished for whatever reason it was. When we asked them to, instead of choosing multiple, just choose one, security is what came out on top. Over a third considered that to be the main motivation for their cloud repatriation. And so this begins to illustrate what we've seen as some of the pain points of going all in on the cloud. There are management challenges. There's expertise challenges. There's the cost management we've talked about, unpredictability. For many of the customers that we work with, it is just compliance requirements. Cloud is not an option because I need to be able to isolate my network. It needs to be able to continue in disaster situations. I can't rely on another provider or even hosting it in a way which could end up in another sovereign territory. Outages and uptime, again, we're relying on someone else to deliver that. And if I need 100% uptime, or as close as possible in our industry, that's not going to be acceptable. Pain with lift and shift. I can't just take my existing infrastructure and put it in the cloud. It's not that straightforward. We need to be designing more cloud native if we're going to go that way. It doesn't work. Quite often the cloud providers are looking on a broad scale, whereas if I'm just managing it myself, I can do more customization. Rather than a one-size-fits-all, I can tailor it to my needs. The lack of control, and again, the vendor lock-in. Once you're all in on one cloud provider, it can be very difficult to switch between them. And so you can get full foul of hikes in prices and things like that. So that led us to the question of what does the future hold then for EUC? Where does EUC live? Because we've seen 93% have had cloud repatriation projects over the last 3 years. 60% already considering or have moved a quarter of their workloads back on-prem. And yet, in our survey, 72% of leaders still said that they were considering starting new projects in the last 2 years. Because those advantages of cloud are still very real. We can't ignore that. And we still want to make the most of that. So, where do we go from here? Well, scenario one. Maybe the cloud delivers. Maybe we were 10 years too fast, 10 years ahead. Maybe over time, that feature gap, that customization will become available in the cloud as well. We'll provide the tools to manage the costs. We'll listen to our customers on that. The reliability will be there. The performance will be there. Maybe AI is the answer. The cloud providers can do something on a scale that none of us can do in our own individual data centers. Maybe that will be the answer. After 10 years in the industry, the education is there, the training, people have the expertise. Maybe the cloud will deliver. Or maybe it's too late. We're going to come back on-prem. Sure, there's a lot we can learn about hosting in containerized environments, about quick turnover, quick updates from the cloud. Maybe we can apply those to our data center providers instead of our infrastructure as a service providers. Maybe that we come back on-prem. But then we do lose the benefits of cloud. And clearly there is something valuable in the cloud if you just look on the numbers and the growth of those businesses. We want to benefit from that as well. So the question is there a third way? And I think Jonathan might have some thoughts about this.
Yeah, so have you considered hybrid? You know, why one or the other? Why not both? Let's take some of the benefits we've got from each and trying to use them where they're most applicable. You know, maybe we can start with on-prem and then expand into cloud and then even back to on-prem where the cloud isn't working for us. And let's try and you know, pick the best tool for the job in each of the scenarios. So another question for everyone. Hands up if you work with end-user computing deployments that have a mixture of cloud and on-prem components. Okay, so that's more than 50%, let's say. Put their hands up there. So what do we mean by hybrid in this case? Obviously, there are the workloads. So, you know, switching between running on an on-prem hypervisor versus running as a, you know, on an infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. But there's also other components in there. So you've got your control plane, and that could be either, again, your a software as a service, or it could be that you're taking you're hosting it yourself, but within the cloud, or it could be that you're hosting it yourself in your own data center. And then there's other parts involved in the access tier. So they could be, you've got your user interface, you've got your gateways, you've got your IDP. Now, for each of these components, it could be that they're going cloud or on-prem or a mixture of both of each of those individual components, and you know, between them, obviously, you have a vast number of different combinations that are possible. So another one from the survey was when we asked people what they would recommend to the CIO, and as you can see, you know, the vast majority was going to be really hybrid, some on cloud. Some on-prem. With actually a bias, a big bias towards mostly cloud, some on-prem. But you know, not many people were going to entirely on the cloud, and hardly any would be going to completely on-prem. So put together a few case studies based on, these are based on genuine examples I've seen when speaking to different organizations. So one is the burst capacity. So perhaps you've already got, you know, some industries have perhaps different requirements at different times of the year. Maybe, for example, retail, when in the run-up to Christmas, you need a lot more employees, and therefore you need a lot more of your VDI infrastructure at that certain times of the year. And you may already have a certain amount of fixed capacity on-prem that you already own and maintain. And it would be a sort of waste of money to throw all that away, particularly if you've already got the experience and the equipment. But then at busy periods, you want to be able to extend that by renting additional capacity. So in this case, we've got our sort of main core sort of on-prem resources. In this case, we've got a sort of cloud control plane, but it can access either some on-prem resources or some cloud of resources. And I mean, the access tier could be cloud or on-prem, doesn't really matter, but you can ramp this part up, and then importantly, once the busy period is over, you can ramp it back down again, and therefore save yourself that cost. Another case I've come across with it's an organization where most of the deployment is cloud-based. However, they've got a number of manufacturing sites around the world that are critical to their business. They need to ensure that within the case of an emergency situation, they can run those manufacturing sites completely disconnected from not only the internet, but the rest of their internal network for up to 48 hours. So in normal situations, the resources can be accessed from anywhere. They have their cloud resources, they have their on-prem resources, and they have in fact, they have a cloud access tier they can use to access all those resources. They also have an on-prem access tier, which, again, in normal times, have to be able to access anything. But what they can do is to then tether those links. And when that happens, those people running in the manufacturing site can just use entirely on-prem-based deployment to access exactly the same resources they were accessing before. And what was their cloud control plane will fall over into a local mode using the cache it has of the resources locally. And they can continue to operate in that way. Another case, a large multinational bank who is aiming to move to cloud as much as possible. However, they have some certain countries they operate in where they have to, for data jurisdiction reasons, operate on-prem. And that's not just the workloads. They need to have their control planes running separately on-prem as well in those countries. So they've got both their cloud deployments and control plane, on-prem and control plane, and then they have an access tier that merges together all of those resources. So as someone using them, they don't know where those are. They could be one of the on-prem, they could be cloud, but it's transparent to those users. So what are some of the, and the final one I've got is disaster recovery. So this is another organization that is currently operating largely on-prem. Now, they would like to move to the cloud, but they feel that at this time that they have a very complex system, and it's just going to take some time for them to get there. However, what they do have is set up an entirely separate cloud-based deployment for disaster recovery scenarios. Now, this doesn't cover everything that their on-prem deployment does, but it covers enough that they would be able to continue their business in the event of a disaster. And of course, the great thing about this is most of the time it is the VMs are shut down and not costing them any money at all. And then they will only turn it on and start during that cost if in an emergency when they need to do that. So what are you looking out for when you're hide your deployment? You want to try and get to something which is going to be transparent to the user. They're not going to be aware. They shouldn't care what they're connecting to. They should just be able to connect to their desktop or their apps, and it works the same wherever it happens to be hosted. And then for the admins, admins don't want to have to learn two different systems. They want to use one set of tools, and for them to be, as far as possible, to be the same tools with the same concepts and so on. Obviously, there are many ways in which that's not going to be possible. There are fundamental differences, but you want to try and make it that process as simple as possible. And then as functionality, you don't want to have to choose between on-prem and cloud based on what features the vendor happens to have implemented on one or the other. I know Certainly my own employer has been definitely guilty in the past of focusing on cloud and to the detriment of some of the on-prem products and leaving out features from on-prem. So you had awkward decisions there about, well, I'd like to move to on-prem, or I'd like to go on-prem, but this feature is only available in cloud, and so on. So as part of your decisions, one question is, what workloads do you wish to move to cloud? Are they, is this for, and why? Is this for disaster recovery, burst, or is it going to be your, primary location? And then obviously some things are better suited than others, particularly if you want to do fast scaling, then that's a good use for the cloud. But what about other situations? It might be best on-prem. It may be that you've got much more bespoke use cases, complex customizations, where the sort of more standardized cloud deployments just don't meet those needs. You've got questions of, you might have questions of situations where you need to have very low latencies. You might have data jurisdiction requirements or security requirements, which means that those use cases have to be on cloud. And of course, in some of those scenarios, you need to synchronize those data between the two different locations. And then if you're going to move some of the workloads to cloud, then obviously which public clouds are you going to be using? Obviously they all have their the different benefits. You should be looking at things like the, do they meet your uptime requirements? Well, their SLAs, how many outages how reliable they are. And then another question is, do the, on the control plane itself, you've also got that same question. On each of these different components, the IDP, the control plane, the end user interface, we've got to decide what's more suitable on-prem, what's in the cloud. And is there going to, in some situations, you're going to have both. And then what is the fallback when cloud services fail? Have you got some business continuity solution to ensure that when things do go wrong, because these processes are now outside of your control, they can go wrong, what are you going to do then? Do you have some sort of fallback so you can continue to run things successfully on premise? Okay, well, these are lots of advantages and considerations, but obviously, as with all options, there are also drawbacks. You're now going to have to configure two different systems. So you're going to have expertise both on your cloud systems and on your on-prem systems. You're going to have that security expertise as well. Then there is the then you're going to have increased numbers of vendors that you're going to have to deal with, as you've got your cloud providers as well as having to deal with your vendors of your on-prem software. And you've also got the difficulties of that replication. You're going to have to now have that, particularly situations like disaster recovery, burst, you'll be able to replicate that data between cloud and on-prem. Okay, thank you very much. Any more questions?